Mexico's $7.5 billion Interoceanic Corridor. Stretching 188 miles across the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, this railway aims to ease a major chokehold.
Mexico has just unveiled the Interoceanic Corridor, a $7.5 billion megaproject. And if it works the way they're planning, it could seriously change the way the world works, ending the Panama Canal's trade dominance.
This is the Interoceanic Corridor of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec in southern Mexico, a narrow, landlocked strip connecting two oceans.
The logistical nightmare. Before diving into Mexico's bold new gamble, it helps to rewind the clock way back to when getting cargo from New York to San Francisco was the global equivalent of a logistical migraine. In the early 1900s, there were really only two ways to make the trip, and both were awful. Option 1, haul it across the entire United States by land, which took forever and cost a fortune. Option 2, load it on a ship and sail it all the way down to the tip of South America, around Cape Horn, or worse, the treacherous Strait of Magellan. Think ice-cold winds, violent squalls, and months at sea where a single misjudged wave could erase an entire voyage. It was a world where the oceans themselves dictated the pace of civilization. Every ton of coal, every crate of cargo, had to obey nature's long, unforgiving routes. And humanity, being humanity, got tired of listening. That's when a bold idea resurfaced. What if ships didn't have to go around the continent at all? What if they could go through it? This dream wasn't new. The first whispers of it go back to the 1500s, when Spanish explorer Vasco Núñez de Balboa stood on a ridge and realized only a narrow strip of land separated the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Spain's King Charles I even asked his governor to survey a route, but 16th century technology wasn't exactly up for cutting through mountains, jungles, and swamps. The idea sat dormant for centuries, occasionally revived by adventurers and visionaries who believed it could be done. Then, in the 1880s, France, flush with pride after building the Suez Canal, decided to give it a shot. Enter Count Ferdinand de Lesseps, the man who'd tamed the Egyptian desert. He figured Panama would be just another notch on his engineering belt. He was wrong. Rainfall drowned machinery, landslides buried progress, and disease decimated entire camps. The French dreamed of a sea-level canal, but by 1888, after losing more than 22,000 workers to yellow fever, malaria, and exhaustion, they ran out of money, willpower, and hope. The project was abandoned, a graveyard of ambition left to rot in the jungle. When the United States took over the failed French project in 1904, Panama was practically cursed. The area was infamous for disease. Even the construction of the earlier Panama Railroad had claimed around 12,000 lives. But the United States had something the French didn't, an understanding of tropical medicine and a determination that bordered on madness. Dr. William Gorgas, an army physician, launched an all-out war against mosquitoes. A tiny insect caused diseases that ended the lives of healthy men, sending them to their early graves. Entire swamps were drained, homes were fumigated, and oil was poured into standing water to suffocate larvae. Slowly, the death toll began to fall. At the same time, the canal's chief engineer, John Stevens, scrapped the original French plan for a sea-level passage. Instead, he proposed a radical solution, a system of locks, enormous water elevators that could lift ships over the continental divide. It was brilliant, yet complicated. When Stevens resigned, Lieutenant Colonel George Washington Goethals took command, and the real work began. More than 40,000 men toiled in unbearable heat, carving a channel through mountains that seemed to regenerate overnight with every landslide. Steam shovels groaned like beasts, dynamite thundered through the valleys, and rail cars hauled millions of cubic yards of rock day and night. Workers lived in mosquito nets, fought heat stroke and dysentery, and buried friends faster than they could remember their names. It was hell on earth, but progress was unstoppable. After a decade of unimaginable effort, the impossible became real. In August 1914, as Europe plunged into World War I, the Panama Canal quietly opened to the world. A cargo ship called the SS Ancon made the first official transit, and just like that, global trade was reborn. The canal instantly became the beating heart of world commerce. Ships that once spent months battling storms around South America could now glide between oceans in mere hours. The United States cemented its status as a global power, controlling not just territory, but the very arteries of trade. But the story didn't end there, because while the Panama Canal was built to last, even the mightiest marvels of the industrial age eventually meet their limits. Today, more than a century later, droughts, traffic jams, and rising costs are testing its endurance. And as the canal struggles, a new challenger has appeared. Not from across the world, but right next door. Mexico is betting billions that it can do what once seemed impossible: rival the Panama Canal itself. The struggle to evolve. Over 10,000 ships glide through its narrow locks in the Panama Canal every year, carrying over 500 million tons of cargo, everything from sneakers and soybeans to sports utility vehicles and smartphones. It's no exaggeration to say the canal is the beating heart of global trade, but lately that heart has been skipping a few beats. Because here's the thing, the world of 1914, when the canal first opened, doesn't exist anymore. Ships have gotten huge. Some are floating skyscrapers. Global trade has exploded, with mega containers now carrying entire economies on their decks. And even after the canal's massive $5.4 billion expansion in 2016, it's struggling to keep up. That 2016 expansion was supposed to future-proof the added a brand new set of. The Panamax era gave way to Neo-Panamax, letting ships 3 times larger squeeze through. For a while it worked. More cargo, bigger ships, bigger tolls, everyone was. In 2023, Panama suffered one of its worst droughts on record. The canal depends on fresh water from nearby lakes to operate its locks. Every ship that passes through drains millions of gallons. But when the rains stopped, the water levels dropped so low that authorities had to slash daily ship transits from 36 to as few as 22. And that's just a massive inconvenience for the supply chain. Ships queued for days, sometimes weeks, costing companies millions. Some cargo was rerouted around South America. Ironically, back to the dangerous detours the canal was built to avoid in the first place, and the ripple effects reached everywhere: higher costs, delayed deliveries, and frustrated exporters from Texas to Tokyo. The Panama Canal still handles about 6% of global maritime trade, but the cracks are showing. The water problem isn't going away. Climate models suggest rainfall in Panama could keep declining. Add in constant maintenance, political wrangling, and ever-rising toll fees, and suddenly the world's most famous canal is feeling its age. And just as the canal begins to falter, Mexico sees an opening. This isn't Mexico's first rodeo with interoceanic ambitions. Way back in the late 1800s, President Porfirio Diaz had a vision of his own. Why not build a shortcut across the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, the narrowest stretch of land in southern Mexico, connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans? And believe it or not, he actually did it. By 1907, 7 years before the Panama Canal opened, trains were already hauling cargo across Mexico's southern wasteland. For a brief shining moment, it worked. Ships would dock on one coast, goods were loaded onto trains, and within hours they'd reach the opposite shore. Trade boomed. The railway was hailed as a triumph. Mexico had carved out a place in the global shipping spotlight, until history threw a curveball. Then came 1914. The Panama Canal opened, and overnight, Mexico's railway became yesterday's news. Why bother unloading ships, transferring cargo by train, and reloading it again when you could just sail straight through Panama? Within a single year, cargo volumes on the Tehuantepec line collapsed by 80%. Within a decade, it was nearly abandoned. The tracks rusted, the stations fell silent, and Mexico's grand shortcut faded into a dusty footnote of maritime history. But history has a funny way of repeating itself, and this time the timing couldn't be more dramatic. Fast forward more than a century. It's 2018. The Panama Canal is groaning under modern strain. Global trade is booming, and Mexico's president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, has a bold idea: revive the dream. The plan? Build a modern railway along the same historic Tehuantepec route, only this time with high-speed freight lines, upgraded ports, and industrial hubs on both ends. It's called the Interoceanic Corridor, and at a price tag of $7.5 billion. That's not a small gamble. But AMLO's pitch is simple. Where Panama uses water, Mexico will use rails, faster, more flexible, and immune to drought. And beyond shipping, the corridor could ignite an economic boom through southern southern Mexico, connecting ports, factories, and logistics hubs in ways the original line could only dream of. The world is watching closely. Investors see opportunity. Skeptics see déjà vu. Can Mexico really compete with a canal that's been the king of trade for over 100 years? Or is this another ambitious project destined to fade when the tides shift again? What's clear is this: global shipping is changing fast. Climate stress, bigger ships, and unpredictable economics are reshaping the map of trade. For the first time in over a century, the Panama Canal's supremacy isn't guaranteed. Mexico's megaproject takes shape. Take a look at a world map for a second. You can't miss it. That slender strip of land linking North and South America looks like someone designed it to be sliced clean in two. It's a natural choke point, a connector, a bridge between oceans. For centuries, engineers, empires, and dreamers have stared at that stretch and thought the same thing. What if we could cut right through it? Only once has humanity actually pulled it off, with the Panama Canal, but that might be about to change. The Interoceanic Corridor is the centerpiece of that plan, a 300-kilometer high-speed rail line connecting the Pacific and Atlantic, flanked by upgraded highways, brand-new deep-water ports, and sprawling industrial parks. It's designed to be fully multimodal, meaning trains, trucks, and ships all working together in one synchronized system. Picture it like this: a ship docks on Mexico's Pacific coast. Cranes unload its containers onto waiting trains. Those trains shoot across the country in a matter of hours, not days, before offloading at the Atlantic port, where another ship takes them onward to Europe, the United States East Coast, or beyond. It's a relay race between oceans, fast, efficient, and most importantly, not dependent on rainfall. The CIIT isn't just one rail line, it's a network. 3 major rail routes form its backbone, with over 1,000 kilometers of total track tying together ports, highways, and industrial zones. Line Z, the crown jewel, stretches 308 kilometers from Salina Cruz to Coatzacoalcos, carrying both cargo and passengers. 2 more water ports are being expanded to handle massive container ships that even the Panama Canal can't accommodate. And here's where things get really ambitious. Alongside the rail and port upgrades, the government is setting 10 development or industrial parks across the coast of Veracruz and Tabasco. Each one is designed to lure global manufacturers with tax breaks, cheap energy, and easy export access. Sectors like automotives, semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, and clean energy are already being. Companies such as Mota Engel Mexico, Grupo Carso, and Proistmo have jumped in to develop them. The hope? To spark a southern Mexican economic boom worth $50 billion in private investment and create 500,000 jobs along the way. Construction kicked off in 2020, and Mexico didn't waste time. Old, rusted rails were new steel tracks laid. Ports began their transformations. Passenger service even started in December 2023, a symbolic milestone showing the corridor's not just a concept, it's happening. By April 2024, the project hit another milestone. 900 Hyundai vehicles made the trip across Mexico on Line Z, from Salina Cruz to Coatzacoalcos, bound for the United States. The trip took about a week, faster and cheaper than sending the same cargo through Panama. And while it's still early days, that single shipment sent a message: this isn't fantasy anymore. The Interoceanic Corridor works. Of course, no megaproject comes without friction. The corridor is managed by the Mexican Navy, which oversees security and construction, a move meant to keep operations tight and corruption in check. But it's also raised eyebrows among indigenous and environmental groups worried about displacement, land rights, and water use. Officials insist that energy and water will be plentiful, and that the project will bring prosperity to long-neglected regions. But skepticism lingers, especially given Mexico's track record with large-scale infrastructure projects. Then there's the global chessboard. The CIIT isn't just about trade, it's about geopolitics. Mexico is quietly positioning itself as a new gateway between the Pacific and Atlantic, appealing to partners in the United States, China, and Europe who are all seeking faster, more secure supply chains. As global trade routes shift, with climate disruptions, wars, and canal bottlenecks, a reliable land bridge across Mexico suddenly looks a lot more attractive. For Mexico, the CIIT is more than steel and ports. It's a statement. a declaration that the country can stand shoulder to shoulder with the world's great trade powers. If it succeeds, it could transform southern Mexico from a forgotten backwater into the logistics capital of the Americas, a hub for factories and industries, becoming another grand dream left to rust, like the 1907 railway that came before it. But bold ideas mean nothing unless they deliver, and the real question now is whether a railway can truly stand toe-to-toe with a canal that moves 500 million tons of cargo a year. Rails rival water. Can Mexico's rails really rival Panama's river? Not exactly, at least not yet. Mexico isn't marching out to dethrone the Panama Canal, at least not officially. The line from Mexico City is more diplomatic. We're not replacing the canal, we're complementing it. Think of the Interoceanic Corridor as a kind of pressure valve for global trade. When Panama gets jammed, because of droughts, maintenance delays, or just too many ships trying to squeeze through, the corridor steps in to keep goods moving. But here's where it gets interesting. On paper, this isn't a rivalry. In reality, it's starting to look like one. Because if the CIIT turns out to be faster, cheaper, and more flexible, well, shipping companies aren't exactly sentimental. They go where the savings are. Money doesn't care about tradition. Let's crunch the numbers for a second. A full transit through the Panama Canal can take anywhere from 8 to 10 hours. That's if you get a slot. But thanks to 2023's historic drought, some ships had to wait up to a week just to pass through. Meanwhile, Mexico's rail corridor can move a container from Salina Cruz on the Pacific to Coatzacoalcos on the Atlantic in under 8 hours. Add port handling on both sides, and you're still looking at a potential end-to-end transfer time that competes head-on with Panama's current delays. And then there's cost. Panama's tolls have skyrocketed. Some large vessels are paying over $1 million per crossing. With the CIIT, the model's different. Pay for port handling, rail transfer, and local fees. But no bottlenecks, no bidding for passage slots, and no sitting idle burning fuel while waiting your turn. For certain cargo types, like vehicles, electronics, or containerized goods headed for the United States East Coast, the math starts tilting in Mexico's favor. Now let's talk about something Panama literally can't do: accommodate the giants. The Panamax expansion in 2016 allowed the canal to fit larger ships, but not the ultra-mega container vessels that dominate today's trade routes. Some of these behemoths are simply too wide, too heavy, and too tall to squeeze through Panama's locks. For them, Mexico's overland shortcut could be a lifesaver. Drop cargo on one coast, zip it across by train, and reload on the other. And that's the beauty of the CIIT. It's flexible. It doesn't have to replace the canal. It can work alongside it. Imagine hybrid logistics chains where goods sail one leg through Panama and the other across Mexico, optimizing for time and cost along the way. For global shipping, it's not a zero-sum game. It's more like opening a new lane on a global highway. But the CIIT isn't just a freight story, it's a human one too. In December 2023, Mexico rolled out its first passenger service along the corridor. Tourists can now ride sleek air-conditioned trains that cut through jungle valleys and mountain passes, connecting the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific in a single day. For locals, that's more than convenience. It's transformation. Remote communities plugged into the national grid of commerce and tourism. Imagine getting onto a train in Veracruz, sipping coffee as you glide through Zapotec lands, and arriving in Salina Cruz by sunset to catch the ocean breeze. It's not just a new trade route, it's a cultural bridge, and the impact doesn't stop there. For Oaxaca and Veracruz, two of Mexico's historically underdeveloped states, the corridor is a chance to finally cash in on their geography. For regions long left out of Mexico's modernization, the corridor could be nothing short of a lifeline. Still, competition is heating up. Panama isn't sitting idle. It's exploring its own expansions and even alternative rail links to stay ahead. The rivalry might not be declared, but it's definitely felt. And in a world where trade routes are the arteries of the global economy, a little healthy competition could push both nations to innovate faster. Because in the end, it's not really rails versus water. It's all about adaptability. The canal has history and prestige. The corridor has ambition and momentum. One carved its legacy through concrete and water a century ago. The other's laying down steel and digital infrastructure for a century to come. So no, Mexico hasn't toppled the king, but it's definitely placed a new contender on the board. Yet, as with every grand vision, there's a darker side, and not everyone is cheering Mexico's new empire of rails. The controversies and criticisms. Big dreams make big headlines and big enemies. Mexico's Interoceanic Corridor, for all its ambition and promise, hasn't exactly been welcomed with open arms. Behind the shiny renderings and presidential speeches, there's a growing list of disputes, protests, and uneasy questions about what it all really costs, not just in pesos, but in people and nature. Let's start with one of the biggest shockwaves, the Ferrosur rail line seizure. In May 2023, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador's government sent the Navy to take control of a section of track owned by Grupo Mexico, a powerful conglomerate run by billionaire German Larrea. Officially, the move was framed as a temporary occupation to secure national interests and integrate the line into the Interoceanic Corridor network. But many saw it differently, as an outright government takeover. It sparked outrage in Mexico's business circles. Critics called it a red flag for investors, a reminder that the state could step in at any time if projects didn't align with political goals. Grupo Mexico eventually reached a compensation deal, but the damage was done. The message was clear. The corridor might be about trade and progress, but it's also about power. And that power struggle doesn't stop at the boardroom. Down in Oaxaca and Veracruz, indigenous communities have been raising their voices and blocking tracks. For generations, they've lived on the land the corridor now cuts through. Many say they were never properly consulted about how the construction would affect their homes, crops, or water sources. The government claims it held community meetings and secured consent, but activists tell another story, one of rushed consultations, missing translations, and intimidation. In towns like Juchitán and Matias Romero, banners have appeared reading "El Istmo no se vende," the isthmus is not for sale. These communities aren't against progress, they just want to be part of it. They want guarantees that the land won't be stripped bare and that the benefits won't all flow northward while locals are left with the noise, dust, and displacement. Then there's the environment, a topic that's become impossible to ignore. Environmental groups, including Mongabay and Greenpeace Mexico, have raised alarms about the project's ecological footprint. The corridor cuts through biodiversity hotspots in southern Mexico, home to jaguars, toucans, and countless endemic species. Construction means deforestation, noise pollution, and rising carbon dioxide emissions from expanded industrial zones and freight traffic. Even though the government insists the project includes green initiatives, like reforestation and cleaner energy sources, independent assessments suggest those measures fall far short of the environmental cost. Critics worry that in the rush to industrialize the South, Mexico could repeat the same mistakes that left scars elsewhere. Economic growth at the expense of the ecosystems that make the region unique. And there are also whispers about the money, because $7.5 billion doesn't just appear out of thin air. The Interoceanic Corridor is one of Mexico's most expensive infrastructure undertakings in decades. Supporters argue that it's a smart investment, a gateway to foreign capital and jobs, but economists are more cautious. Maintenance on 300 kilometers of modern railway, 2 deepwater ports, and multiple industrial parks isn't cheap. Once the headlines fade, will Mexico be able to keep the trains running, the ports efficient, and the investors happy without sinking deeper into public debt? Financial analysts have pointed out that the corridor's success depends on consistent global trade demand, something that fluctuates with wars, recessions, and shifting alliances. If international shipping routes pivot again, Mexico could find itself with a multi-billion-dollar corridor, and not enough cargo to justify it. And hanging over all of this is politics. The Interoceanic Corridor isn't just a megaproject, it's AMLO's legacy. His administration has poured political capital into it, branding it as a symbol of sovereignty, development, and national pride, especially in contrast to past governments that focused on the country's industrial north. But legacy projects come with baggage. Critics accuse the president of using the military to bypass bureaucracy, centralize control, and shield projects from oversight. Indeed, under AMLO, the Mexican Navy and Army now oversee not just national security but infrastructure, tourism, and logistics, a concentration of power that's raising eyebrows at home and abroad. The Washington Post described it as part of Mexico's new direction, where the military plays both builder and guardian of economic strategy. Supporters call it efficient, detractors call it dangerous. So yes, the Interoceanic Corridor is bold, but it's also messy. It's an engineering marvel wrapped in political theater, draped over a fragile social and environmental landscape. Whether it becomes a model for modern trade or a cautionary tale about overreach depends on how Mexico navigates these growing pains. Controversial or not, the trains keep rolling, and Mexico's momentum could reshape not just trade but technology itself. Mexico's logistics revolution. If you zoom out from the jungles and ports of southern Mexico, you start to see a bigger picture, one that stretches far beyond a single railway. What's happening isn't just about reviving an old trade route, it's about reshaping how goods move across an entire continent. Call it what you want, a comeback, a reinvention, or straight-up revenge of geography, but Mexico is quietly building itself into a logistics powerhouse. Here's why it matters. Mexico sits in a golden spot on the world map. It shares a massive border with the United States, the world's biggest consumer market, and it's part of the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, which basically means that trucks, trains, and cargo ships are constantly zipping across borders carrying everything from car engines to avocados. Every day, about $1.8 billion worth of goods crosses between Mexico and the United States. But geography alone isn't enough anymore. The future of trade is all about speed, transparency, and tech. And that's where Mexico's logistics revolution kicks in. Across the country, freight shipping is getting a digital makeover. GPS tracking now lets companies see exactly where a truck is. Not somewhere near Puebla, but lane 3, 2.4 kilometers from the toll booth. AI-driven routing helps avoid traffic jams, weather delays, and customs bottlenecks. Warehouses that once relied on clipboards and paper logs are now using automated systems that scan, sort, and move cargo in minutes. Think Amazon-level precision, but scaled up for international trade. These upgrades aren't just fancy gadgets. They're cutting costs and slashing delivery times. A shipment that used to take 3 days from Monterrey to Dallas can now make the trip in nearly half that. That's a huge deal when you're dealing with perishable goods or tight supply chains. And it's exactly what global manufacturers want to hear right now. Because here's the thing, nearshoring. The trend of United States companies relocating production from Asia to Mexico is exploding. After years of supply chain chaos, thanks to pandemic, companies are realizing it's smarter to make things close to home. Mexico checks all the boxes. Lower labor costs than the United States, proximity for quick shipping, and trade protections under USMCA. Tech giants, automakers, and even semiconductor manufacturers are planting flags south of the border. Tesla's Gigafactory in Nuevo León, for example, isn't just about cars. It's about anchoring an ecosystem of suppliers, transport networks, and export hubs. Similar stories are unfolding in Querétaro, Guadalajara, and Monterrey, where logistics parks and industrial zones are multiplying like wildfire. And this isn't just about the North. The government is making sure the South, historically poorer and less developed, gets a slice of the action too. That's where the Interoceanic Corridor of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec fits perfectly into the puzzle. It's not a standalone project. It's a cornerstone of Mexico's plan to connect Pacific to Atlantic shipping with inland manufacturing hubs and export routes into the United States. Meanwhile, on the coasts, Mexico is upgrading its maritime muscle. The port of Lázaro Cárdenas on the Pacific is now a major player in handling Asian imports, while Veracruz on the Gulf side has been expanded with new terminals, cranes, and digital customs systems. Together, they're forming a kind of dual-engine system that complements the CIIT and helps distribute trade traffic more evenly across the country. Even globally, Mexico's reach is growing. As a member of the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, a mega-trade pact linking it with countries like Japan, Australia, and Canada, Mexico is becoming a gateway not just between North and South America, but between the Pacific and Atlantic economies. It's a strategic pivot that puts the country right in the middle of the 21st century's biggest trade currents. But what really ties all these threads together is ambition. For decades, Mexico was seen mainly as a manufacturing base, the place where goods were made cheaply before heading north. That's changing. Now it wants to be the hub where global supply chains converge, where goods aren't just assembled but moved, managed, and optimized through world-class logistics. To make that happen, Mexico is investing not just in infrastructure, but in people and policy. Universities are expanding programs in supply chain management. Customs procedures are being modernized, and new private-public partnerships are being forged to make logistics more sustainable, using electric trucks, smart ports, and data-driven energy grids to reduce emissions. It's a transformation that's as much about mindset as machinery. The country that once watched its railway dreams rust away is now rebranding itself as a bridge between continents. And it's doing it at the exact moment when the world's trade map is being redrawn. Sure, there are challenges: energy supply, corruption risks, and the ever-present tug-of-war between regulation and innovation. But the direction is clear. The Mexico of the next decade isn't just shipping avocados and car parts. It's orchestrating the symphony of global commerce, using a blend of geography, grit, and digital innovation to take center stage. From dusty tracks to data-driven trade routes, Mexico's logistics revolution isn't just keeping up with the times. It's rewriting the rules of how the modern world moves. From the ashes of an abandoned railway, Mexico is rewriting history. But what does this mean for Panama's legacy? Let's be honest. This feels like the start of a brand new chapter in global trade. For over a century, the Panama Canal reigned supreme. It wasn't just a shortcut between oceans. It was a symbol of human ambition, of what happens when the world decides to literally move mountains, or in this case, continents, to make commerce faster. For decades, it defined how globalization worked, connecting factories in Asia to ports in New York, fueling empires, wars, and entire economies along the way. But time has a way of humbling even the greatest achievements. Today, the Panama Canal faces an existential challenge that no amount of engineering can fully fix: climate change. The same rainfall that once filled its locks and reservoirs has become unreliable. Panama built the dream that defined the 20th century. Mexico might just be building the one that defines the 21st. The age of canals defined the past. The age of corridors may define the future. So here we are, trains racing where jungles once swallowed steel, ports buzzing where silence reigned, and two nations now sharing the same goal: to keep the world connected. The world's eyes are fixed on Mexico. The question is, can it truly rewrite the rules of global trade? What's your take on this? Share your perspective in the comments section. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.